This is the border of Taiwan, but the Chinese flag flutters here. We are on Kinmen Island, where you occasionally see the flags of political rivals, China and Taiwan, flying side by side. One cooperative project is this reservoir, which stores water pumped from China that helps fill some of Kinmen's needs. In 2018, Kinmen turned to China to resolve persistent water shortages. Wang Shizhe manages the waterworks here. For him, cross-strait interaction is more than just diplomacy. It shapes his everyday life.
There's a Chinese idiom that says a close neighbor is more helpful than distant family. The pipeline is groundbreaking. It eases cross-strait hostility and sets a precedent to connect our electricity grids or even build a bridge in the future. We want friends instead of enemies.
Many on the island echo these views of rapprochement, but likely not the majority of Taiwanese. Hong Zheng, a parliamentary candidate from a pro-independence party, is skeptical. His opposition to China has risen. Beijing's influence has been the central issue ahead of this weekend's elections. But Hong says it was only when Hong Kong descended into political turmoil that he made up his mind.
Our leaflets feature the Hong Kong protests because they trigger a strong sense of national doom. Looking at the tragic outcome, the Taiwanese have to think about whether we should still seek closer ties with the authoritarian regime behind Hong Kong.
This is Taiwan's closest place to China, which is only around 5 kilometers away. It used to be the front line in conflicts decades ago that military barricades were left here. But nowadays, China is trying to narrow the distance with Taiwan, not only economically, but also politically. The Taiwanese authorities see this as threats and has been distancing itself from China over the past 4 years. China, a friend or a foe? President Xi Jinping has vowed to unify self-ruling Taiwan under one country, two systems, as China did with Hong Kong, if necessary by force. But this idea was rejected by Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen, who is seeking re-election. His China-friendly rival Han Kuo-yu has a different response to Beijing's intimidation tactics. He advocates warmer ties through economic cooperation, which Wang Shizhe and his friends also support. They largely rely on China for a living.
I used to perceive China as a threat, but not now. I saw gradual progress when I got in touch with the Chinese. All we want are peaceful and prosperous lives instead of constructing a so-called threat. I don't care whether there will be unification or infiltration. This is not what my generation will encounter.
If Taiwan and China are to interact, we must be treated fairly. That means state-to-state relations. What kind of price are we willing to pay for that? Taiwan should be more aware of China's sharp elbows than anywhere else in the world, because we're on the front line. We're the only place that China wants to take control of.
Decades ago, loudspeakers inside this iconic landmark used to broadcast anti-China propaganda to the mainland. It's now a tourist destination. But the message of freedom and democracy as the most distinctive difference across the strait remains just as timely as ever.
And joining me now, the author of that report, Phoebe Kong from our East Asia Bureau in Taipei, and also joining us is correspondent Matthias Bullinger in Beijing. Phoebe, to you first. Is the pro-China sentiment on Kinmen Island reflective of the overall view in Taiwan, would you say?
Well, it represents the view of a certain number of Taiwanese as a whole on the main island, but it's obviously under challenge and getting less popular when compared to a decade ago. And when we talk about the split opinions that we have experienced in Taiwan for decades, it's a complicated issue because it involves identity, values, and economy. And for many elder generation in Taiwan, most of them, they identify themselves as ethnic Chinese in the broader sense because many of them fled to Taiwan right after the Chinese Civil War, where they still have some family ties with mainland China. But on the other hand, for the younger generation who were born and raised in Taiwan, they simply don't recognize themselves as Chinese. They think they are Taiwanese, who they have nothing to do with China, they have no bonding with the mainland China, and more importantly, they feel the China is getting more aggressive invasive and intrusive to Taiwan's fundamental values, which is democracy and civil liberties in recent years. And this further make them feel further distant from the mainland China. And economically, there have been heated debate about whether Taiwan should depend on Chinese market or not. So this is also something have long been argued in almost every single elections in the past.
Matthias, over to you. What is really at stake here for Beijing in these presidential elections?
The fact that Beijing was unable to conquer Taiwan, that the Communist Party was unable to conquer Taiwan in 1949 has been a major tarnish on Beijing's narrative that it has united, pacified and liberated China, and it remains a tarnish on the CCP's narrative until today. In recent years, Beijing has even intensified its campaign to bring Taiwan under the rule of Beijing, and Xi Jinping has made it a major issue of his signature policies. So a win by the pro-independence camp in these elections would, of course, damage the Taiwan policy of the CCP as one of the core policies of this nationalist narrative that Beijing is pushing forward. It would show that Beijing does not have the soft power to convince people that it is a good governance organization.
Phoebe, when it comes to Taiwan's sovereignty, this has been an issue in presidential elections since 1996. What is so special now?
Well, when we look at exactly 1 year ago, Chinese President Xi Jinping gave a speech on China's Taiwan policy, where he took a tough stance on unification with Taiwan under one country, two systems. So this is the formula where China adopted to take Hong Kong back under control in 1997 from the Britain. And but for many Taiwanese on the island, they view that the Hong Kong protest has been an explicit example of the failure of one country, two systems, and further deepen their distrust towards Beijing's commitment. And many of them, they are afraid of Taiwan will lose its democratic way of life if the government get too close to Beijing, and some are even anxious about whether there will be a political agreement signed with Beijing if China-friendly candidates rule Taiwan.
Matthias, final question to you. Given what's happening in Hong Kong, is there a rethink in Beijing about the messaging for Taiwan from the Communist Party?
We don't know that. If it is, it is happening in the back chambers behind closed doors. What we have noticed is that Beijing has not said anything in public about these upcoming elections, probably reflecting that stepping out in favor of the Kuomintang candidate Han Kuo-yu would probably not help his cause.
Matthias Billinger in Beijing and Phoebe Kong joining us from Taipei. Thank you both very much.